All right. Tonight, what we're going to do is we just have actually one chapter to cover because this afternoon I've been recording integrity videos. So if you take a look, if you go to your Canvas homepage and you go here, you will see chapter 15 and chapter 18. Okay, those are going to be on the test, but they're pretty short. You can see chapter 15 is 42 minutes long, chapter 18 is 32 minutes long. There's no calculations. This is just from the PowerPoint slides that are on Canvas. Okay, so the test is going to be over 15, 16, and 18. 15 deals with capital. 16 and 18 are loan related. 18 deals with consumer loans. It talks about mortgage loans some, so I skipped over a lot of that. So all of that's there. And then, of course, this will be recorded in case you want to go back and listen to tonight's class. All we have is chapter 16. We can talk about your test next week, test 3. Also remember that your paper is due on the 30th. You will submit it to Canvas. I will get them graded just as soon as I can. Get your grades calculated. Try to get everybody's grade to you. Now keep in mind, Canvas is weighting everything evenly, okay? So just like if you had me for Finance 330 and I told you 25 different times, your grade on Canvas is not correct. Your grade on Canvas in here is not correct, okay? It's going to weight your papers and your tests the same. So when you get your email from me saying your average grade is whatever, and you look on Canvas and you're like, well, wait a minute, no, my grade's different on Canvas, go with what I tell you, okay, and not what's on Canvas. So that'll be next week. If you're happy with your grade after you take the test next week and you get your final average during the middle of the week, you are finished with the class. All right? So I know it's kind of here towards the end. It's been kind of crammed together, which actually that's how it happens every semester, so it's not nothing new to me. Also, I think I might have told you last week that this class tends to be scoring about 2 points higher than last spring's class per test. And so if you if you spend some time studying for this third test, okay, just 3 chapters, 15, 16, and 18, the average score last spring, I think for the test 3 was an 84, I think. So you should really be able to make up a lot of points with this third test and also with your paper. So you might see your averages climb quite a bit for whenever I get you that. Now, of course, if you want to take the comprehensive final to replace a test grade, you have that option. It will be given the Tuesday night of finals week. It will cover all the material that we've covered all semester. Your study guides for that test are the 3 study guides for the first 3 tests. Okay? If you have bonus points attached to a test score, they do not count on the comprehensive final. So for example, if you scored 70 on test 1 and you got 5 bonus points, so you've got a 75, you have to score higher than a 75 on the comprehensive final, and there are no bonus points added to it, okay, to replace your 75, which will be your lowest test score. So I'm not trying to dissuade anybody from taking the comprehensive final. It's just every semester I have a few people who decide they're going to, and typically on average I have one person improve their score. Everybody else, right now it sounds pretty good. If you're like, okay, I messed up on test 1, I'm going to take it comprehensive final, I'm going to blow it out of the water. I'm going to spend so much time studying. But then when finals week gets here, things are a little bit different. And you're like, gosh, I'm so tired. I'm tired of studying. I don't want to see anything about banks. I don't want to hear anything about banks. And so you just kind of walk into the class and take the test, hoping you score well, and it typically doesn't work out too well. No, you should not need them. If you need the 5 bonus points on this last test, I'm sorry, okay, you don't get them. No, for the first 2 tests, though, 5 bonus points. It can be for anybody who needs bonus points, there are 5 bonus point opportunities for test 1 and for test 2. It could be for going to the banking deal. It can be really for going to anything campus related. I've even had people who work related training, whatever. I don't care. I'm just trying to give away the points. So if you've done something at work or at school or both, you can send me one email with the 2 things that you've done, and I will give you both of the extra 5 points. Okay? Because I want to see you do as well as you can in here. So those are available if you need them, and I'd probably rather have them than not have them, just in case. All right, so other questions?
What's your usual average research paper?
I don't know. They're pretty good, though. I mean, what I look for in the research paper is I look for, one, that you follow the directions in terms of paper length, number of citations, all of that stuff. Then I just kind of want a paper that's meant to be sort of an informative paper. So I just kind of read through the paper, and I'm looking for a paper that just flows pretty well and that informs me of whatever you're writing about. You know, if there's an occasional, grammatical error or something, I'm not an English professor, so I'm not that concerned. Now, if every other sentence there's a grammar error or a spelling error, then yes, that's going to be an issue. But if there's the occasional error, that's not an issue whatsoever. But normally, I mean, the grades are pretty good as long as you know how to write a paper in the mid-90s probably. Yeah, I would say on average. I haven't gone back and looked at that, but I'm guessing mid-90s. And there's a lot of papers probably that are upper 90s. It just kind of depends. All right, other questions? All right, so no questions. You're just excited to be here for the last week of lecture. And I am ready. I told one of you a minute ago, I'm so ready for this semester to be over with. So I know students think they're the only ones who want the semester to be over with, and your professors just wish it could go on and on and on. No, it's not like that. Okay, we're ready for it to be finished too. Nothing personal. I like all of you. Okay, it's just I want to see you in another class. Okay, in another semester. How many people are going to be in my 537 class next semester? Some of you. Okay, we need a few more. I need to recruit a few more people to take that class. We need about 4 more, 5 more. Do what? 537.
Scott Allen generally the banking week.
Do what?
Was Scott Allen at banking week when speaking on that?
No. For Finance 350, yeah. Yeah, next semester we're offering 2 banking classes, 2 banking electives. One is Finance 350, which is a counter threat finance class, which is on Monday night, I think. And then the Finance 537, which, and I think I might have told you this, but the Finance 537 is kind of a seminar class. So what that means is it's not like your normal finance class where I come in and lecture and you have tests and that type of thing. I mean, there's no tests in Finance 537. There's, I think, 3 quizzes, a presentation, a group presentation at the end of the semester, but that's typically about every other week. I have a speaker come in from all different areas of banking and talk to you. You're doing the bank simulation, so in a team setting, your team typically has 3 to 5 people on it. You're running a bank and you're competing against the other banks in the class. And so it's really if you can say that it's a fun class, any class is fun. It's kind of a fun class. It's a real hands-on, we're putting into use what we're studying in here. So in here, we're talking, for example, chapter 15, capital ratios. That's not the most exciting thing to lecture about or to hear about, but when you're running your bank and you have to keep an eye on your capital ratio and you have to determine, okay, if my bank gets bigger, which, let's say you want your bank to grow, so if your bank gets bigger asset size-wise, that means if you don't raise additional capital, your capital ratio is going to go down. So if you want your bank to get bigger, you have to either raise more capital or that limits your growth. And if your capital ratio gets too low, you either have to issue new stock, new bonds, or you have to make your bank smaller. You have to shrink your bank. And so that's part of what you would be doing when you're making those decisions every week as a team. So that's typically how it works. You make your decisions, you give them to me, I input them into the computer, I print it out, and the next week when you come to class, I have your printouts for you, and you've got a speaker come in, and then you make your decision, and that's just kind of how it goes the entire semester. So if anybody is interested or wants to know more about it, then I'll be happy to talk to you. All right, so we are in chapter 16. All right, so basically this is talking about loans, lending policies, and procedures. And it kind of falls in between, like I said, in chapter 18, which is on integrity already, I talk about consumer loans. So things like car loans, boat loans, credit card loans, home loans. Those are, loans to consumers. And consumer loans have a lot of characteristics that make them very profitable because there tends to be more risk associated with some consumer loans than other types of loans. So if you're, for example, credit cards are the most profitable type of loan a bank can make. And if you've got a credit card and you've seen the interest rate associated with credit cards, you know that. Because if you have a balance, if you don't pay your balance off each month, you're going to be paying typically anywhere between 14 and 29% interest on your credit card. Now, why is credit card interest, why is it so high compared to, say, a car loan?
People tend not to pay off their credit cards before they don't pay off the car loan.
Okay, so people don't pay it off, or they simply, you talking about like paying it off, or they just simply stop paying on it? Okay, that's exactly right. Yeah, there's more risk with credit card loans. Also, credit card loans are unsecured. A lot of people, when they think of a credit card, they don't even think about a loan. They just think of a credit card as a piece of plastic that if I need to buy something, I give the store the piece of plastic, they give me whatever it is that I'm buying, and a bill will show up a few days later. I can make the minimum payment on it, and I can live like that for years. Okay? Well, a credit card is a loan. You're going to charge something, whatever you're buying. You go to the store, you buy a bottle of water, you put it on your credit card. 25 days later or so, your credit card bill is going to show up. It's going to say, bottle of water, $1.50, whatever. If you don't pay that off, then interest is going to accrue on that. Now, the problem is most people have more than a bottle of water on their credit card. And so that interest being at 15%, 20%, 25%, even 30%, it adds up fast, and it can snowball. It gets out of control quickly. I mentioned in chapter 18's recording that I've had some customers in the past when I was in loaning money who had in excess of $100,000 in credit card loans. Over $100,000. You think your life's bad as a college student? I hope nobody in here owes close to $100,000 in credit card loans. I had one customer, they had their house. They had paid their house off completely. That's kind of the American dream, to have your house paid for. They had their house paid for. They charged up their credit card loans, about $75,000 worth, and they had to take out another mortgage on their house. They had to start over with a 30-year mortgage to pay off their credit card loans, and they had to start paying on their house again. And this was a couple in their 60s. So they were not going to get this house paid off for a second time. That's crazy. Okay? I mean, that's just, and we see things like that, it is heartbreaking to see stories like that. But it's just, I mean, just like with anything else, whether we're talking about drugs or alcohol or eating or whatever, Spending for some people is just something that gets out of control, and it really hurts them financially. I've had some people, some customers, a couple customers who, because of their spending and lack of control and their debt and other things that were going wrong in their life too, two people committed suicide. And one of the reasons was they were under so much financial stress. So, I mean, that's just, you see those things and you wonder why people get themselves in those situations. All right, now, this is basically talking about all different types of loans. So, types of loans made by a bank. Okay, we've talked about real estate loans already. This is back in chapter 9 in your book and the chapter 7 handout. And we talked about this. We said these are secured by real property, so they're secured by some kind of land. So whether it's a home loan, whether it's for a piece of property, whether, whatever it's for, these can be short-term, they can be long-term. You've got financial institution loans. This is where one bank loans another bank money. So banks, just like us, from time to time have to borrow money. You've got ag loans. Now, you kind of cross a few lines here because when it comes to agricultural loans, there are agricultural loans to buy farmland. Okay, so then the question becomes, okay, is that an ag loan or is that a real estate loan? Well, some banks make arguments for, either way. These ag loans, typically when we talk about ag loans, we're talking about operating loans. So in the spring, when a farmer has to buy their seed and their diesel fuel and whatever else, they borrow money. They then have that money borrowed through the end of crop season. When they harvest their crops in the fall and sell them, then they pay the loan back. I mean, that's typically, historically, how an ag loan works, or an operating loan. You've got commercial and industrial loans. These are loans to businesses. You've got loans to individuals, which we talked about. That's chapter 18. You've got kind of a catch-all category of miscellaneous loans. And then you've got something that banks do occasionally called lease financing receivables. And this is where, and it's kind of an odd situation, but it can be a pretty good moneymaker for a bank. A bank buys certain types of equipment and then leases that equipment to a customer. And so the customer then pays the bank the lease payments each month. And you may think, well, why would a bank do that? Well, the reason is, if you look at a loan for a borrower, the interest on the loan is tax deductible. But there are certain qualifiers that when you're leasing a piece of equipment, then it doesn't go against certain ratios. So if I'm leasing a piece of equipment, that's not considered debt. So if I'm calculating my debt ratio as a customer, my debt ratio is going to be lower if I lease a piece of equipment versus buying a piece of equipment. So in this case, an example of this, one of the banks that I worked for, they had purchased a bunch of big copy machines, just like you see on campus, copy machines. And they leased them to the United States Navy. It's one of the oddest things I've ever seen. Okay, I don't know what the hell they were doing buying copy machines and leasing to the Navy. I will tell you that it was a moneymaker for the bank if you could get the Navy to pay their monthly lease. You'd think the United States Navy, surely they've got plenty of money. They can pay their bills on time. They never paid their bills on time. Typically, they were 6 months behind on every single payment. If they had been a loan customer, we would have repossessed those copy machines a long time ago. But every time they were 6 months behind. I spent a lot of my work week, typically half of one day at least each month, on the phone trying to get the Navy to make their payments on these dozens of copy machines that we had bought and leased. Okay, so that was, financially it worked out pretty well, but in terms of manpower and wasted hours, that wasn't a very smart decision. But that's an example of when you say something called a lease financing receivable, that's exactly what it is. Okay, now, not all banks make the same kind of loans. There are different factors that determine the type of loans that a bank will make. For example, first one listed here, the characteristics of the bank's market area. Does the bank operate in an urban area? If they do, they're going to have a different loan clientele and make different types of loans as compared to if a bank is in a suburban area or if they're in a rural area. If you're in Western Kentucky, for example, some banks are going to make agricultural loans. Not all banks in Western Kentucky make ag loans. You may think, why don't they? There's so many farms in the area. Well, I'll let you answer that for me. Why don't all banks in Western Kentucky make ag loans?
U.S. banks do good at making ag loans, because they have other loans they can do it out.
Okay. So they make other loans, for example, other business loans, loans to corporations, whatever.
Instead of ag loans, it's more of a populated area of agriculture.
Okay. Now there's a lot of agricultural opportunities, but what some banks simply determine is, one is ag lending can be risky. Okay, because as anybody who's grown up around a farm knows, I mean, there's a lot to do with weather you have no control over. There are lots of things that you can't control, and banking is about risk. Okay, not necessarily controlling risk, but managing risk. It takes a specialized lender to make an ag loan. If you're going to be an ag lender, it helps for you to have some farm background. Okay, you don't want somebody walking out of college in a urban area who's never seen a farm, and you turn them loose making loans to farmers. I mean, I've seen, maybe not quite to that extent, but I've seen some disaster happen whenever you have somebody who has no idea about farming trying to make loans for tractors. And the first thing they want is the title to the tractor as collateral. What's the problem with that? Tractors don't have titles. Okay, cars have titles, boats have titles, boat motors have titles, boat trailers have titles in certain states. Tractors don't have titles. Okay, so you have to file typically what's called a UCC filing, a Uniform Commercial Code filing, on a tractor or similar piece of equipment. If you're making an ag loan to a farmer, and let's say it's a cattle farmer and they can't make their payments, and you have to round up 100 head of cattle as collateral, you've got problems, okay? Because you've got to have a place, you've got to have somebody, first of all, to round up the cattle, transport the cattle, and store the cattle until you can find a buyer for them. You may think that'd be an easy process. Well, it's probably not, okay? So again, characteristics of the market area. And I will tell you, though, that if you're a good specialized lender, whether it's an ag lender or a commercial lender, which means you loan to businesses, or even a consumer lender, if your customers will follow you from bank to bank, you can make a lot of money. Because banks, if you have a really good, say you're a commercial loan officer, you make loans to businesses, and you've got a $30 million portfolio of loans, which means you have made $30 million worth of loans to customers outstanding right now. And you go to another bank, that bank knows you're going to bring probably 70 to 80% of those customers with you. Because a good banker is just like a good doctor or a good lawyer or a good accountant. If you're comfortable with them and you like doing business with them, you're going to follow them within reason wherever they go. Now, if they move to South Dakota, you're probably not going to follow them up there. But if they're in Paducah and they move to Murray and start lending money, that's not an issue today. Or Mayfield or wherever, you're going to follow them. So again, you can make a lot of money and you can command a really good salary if you have a good reputation and a good portfolio of loans. Now, the size of the lender, you got a couple of different kinds here. You've got wholesale lenders. They typically make large loans to large corporations. So they don't make many loans, but they make loans in the millions of dollar range, anywhere from $1 million to $200 million for one loan. Retail lenders, these tend to be the types of banks that we think about that are located around Western Kentucky. Okay, so they're going to make consumer loans, home loans, and or commercial and ag loans. It just depends on the bank. The experience and expertise of management, that goes back to what I talked about earlier. I mean, some bankers will simply tell you, and I pick on ag loans a lot, but that's one that a lot of lenders who 20 years ago were making lots of ag loans, today they don't make any. And so, you know, they made a lot of farmers angry when you call them in and say, hey, guess what? We're going out of the ag business. I know you owe us $600,000, but you're going to have to find somebody else to loan you that money so that you can pay us back, because we're basically getting rid of your loan. That's happened. So that's made a lot of farmers, and you've had a lot of banks lose some customers over things like that. The expected yield of each type of loan, as I said earlier, credit card loans, typically the highest yield but the highest risk. So you kind of have to, you know, weigh the pros and cons of each type. And then regulations. If you want to make a home loan today, it is 10 times harder than it was 10 years ago, because of the regulations, because of the right before the 2008 meltdown. Does anybody in here deal with real estate loans at work? Any of you? Okay, it's a lot harder. It used to be a pretty simple process. Now, because the regulations, and again, the regulations will ease up, okay? So don't sit there thinking, wow, I thought I wanted to be a loan officer, but he's telling me it's really difficult. Well, it's going to get easier, because that's what always happens. We have a financial crisis. The regulators, they clamp down on the regulations. They throw on a lot of different layers. After about 10 years, they start easing up on the regulations. And that goes on for about another 10 years. Then we have another financial crisis, and it all starts over again. So people look at 2008 and they think, wow, that is incredible. That's probably never going to happen again. Well, maybe not to that extent, but it will happen again. Okay? Give it about 10 more years. All right, so different factors, different types of loans. Banks can, they can basically make any kind of loan they want. Where banks get in trouble a lot of times is when they're making loans where they don't have any knowledge. And again, if we go back to the financial crisis and you had lenders making loans to home builders in Florida, for example, and I pick on that quite a bit in class because that's where banks lost a lot of money. There's not a thing wrong with that. Okay? I mean, that's a really good way for the bank to make money. The home builders are making money, and that works fine as long as people are buying your houses. But when the economy dries up, when real estate prices drop and people stop buying your houses, and you're a builder and you've already built 75 houses in a subdivision that are now sitting empty, you can't make your payments to the bank. And the bank overextended themselves. They got a little greedy because they were making such good money. They didn't really think this through, and now they're in financial trouble. And that goes back to what we talked about in chapter 15, which when you listen to that, it talks about capital and kind of how loan losses work. Now, we talked way back in chapter 5 and 6 about what's called the allowance for loan and lease loss. That's where if a bank makes a bad loan, it's money that's set aside to essentially cushion the losses associated with that bad loan. The problem is when a bank makes too many bad loans, they zero out their allowance for loan and lease loss. Once they do that, any remaining losses come from earnings. Once their earnings are zeroed out, then the losses start coming from capital. And when you listen to chapter 15, I talk about basically banks don't, per asset size, banks don't have to keep a lot of capital. 4% to 8% of their risk-weighted assets is what's considered a well-capitalized bank, depending on if it's tier 1 or total capital, which is tier 1 and tier 2. So what that means is when they start having to draw from capital to cover their loan losses, it doesn't take long for the regulators to step in and say, you've got two options. One is you can close your bank, or two, you can raise more capital. Now, when your loan losses are coming out of capital and you call your investors, your current stockholders, and say, hey, guess what? I appreciate you investing $50,000 in my bank and buying stock earlier, but we've got a little problem. We're about to go out of business, so we'd like for you to buy more stock. How likely do you think they are to buy more stock in your bank? Because right now they're worried that they're going to lose all of their investment that they made in the first place, much less buy additional stock. So when a bank typically needs capital the most is when investors want to invest the least. And that's why we've had 500 bank closures since 2008. Really from 2008 to 2014, really, is that time period. Now, when it comes to regulation of lending, loans, one of the first things that regulators look at. They walk into a bank, they're going to examine the bank for its safety and soundness, and one of the first things they look at are loans, because they want to know, is your bank making good loans or they're making bad loans? So they're going to look at that. The overall safety and soundness of a bank is defined by what's called the UFIRS, the Uniform Financial Institution Rating System, and banks are rated from 1 to 5, 1 being the strongest, 5 being the weakest. So you may hear people refer to, and they won't actually be referring to it with a lot of knowledge because that's supposed to be proprietary information. A bank's rating by an examination agency is known by the examiners and by the senior officers of that bank. That's it. It's illegal for anybody else to know that information. But if you hear somebody referring to a 1-rated bank, what they're referring to is that would be the strongest rating, that would be the safest bank that you could have. A 2-rated bank, still a pretty good bank. 3-rated bank, you kind of have some problems. 4, your doors are almost shut. 5, you're probably not going to get to that 5 rating. You're not going to make it there because they're going to close you down before you make it to a 5. Okay? And when they're rating this 1 to 5, which is called a composite rating, they have 6 areas that they rate also from 1 to 5 to come up with that composite rating. So as we're looking at this, these 6 areas is what's called the CAMELS rating, CAMELS. So that stands for capital adequacy, asset quality, management quality, or just management. E stands for earnings, L stands for liquidity, S stands for sensitivity to market rate changes, or another word for it is interest rate risk. So when an examiner comes in, they examine all 6 of these areas. They rate each one, a 1, a 2, a 3, whatever it might be. And then based on that, each of these component ratings, they give the overall rating. Now, some people look at this and they say, okay, well, let's say we had, 4 2s, and let's say 3 2s and 3 1s. So how would we rate that? Well, it's not simply a nice average that you can take. And the examiners don't do this either, because what they do is they typically have what's called an EIC, an examiner in charge. This is somebody who has some experience. Then they have the examination team, which would be anywhere from 3 to 6 additional examiners. And each person will be assigned one of these areas. And so they're going to talk to the bank, they're going to pull records, they're going to do their analysis, and they're going to provide a rating. It's up to the EIC then to take a look at each one of these and determine the composite rating for the bank. But some of these areas are more important than others. For example, asset quality. Asset quality plays a big role in the overall composite rating of the bank. So you might have a 1S, a 1L, a 1M. But if your asset quality is suffering, it's going to hurt your bank, and you're probably not going to get that 1 rating. Okay? But again, it's kind of hard to tell because unless you've been an examiner or unless you have access to inside information, you really never know what a bank is rated. All right. Now, some of these, and again, this is just part of this we're going to talk about. This one's asset quality, so loan quality. It also includes investments, but primarily it's loans. These are some terms associated with a bank's asset quality. For example, you have some loans that are called criticized loans. A criticized loan has a few small problems, nothing big. Maybe the borrower has been late 30 days a couple times. Maybe the collateral is not quite enough to cover it if the loan is not paid. Or there may be some other small problems with the loan, but it's not really a big deal. You've got scheduled loans. These are loans that have more serious issues. So maybe the borrower has got up to 60 days late. And by the way, there's sort of some key days when it comes to being late on a loan payment that gets noticed by a bank. The first one is 10 days late. When you're 10 days late, normally that's when a bank is going to send out a written notice to you saying, hey, we noticed you're late. Maybe you forgot to make your loan payment. How about, making it? Then 30 days is typically the next one. 30 days is when it shows up on your credit report. So if you're 30 days late, that's when it's going to show up on your credit report. That's when the bank's going to start sweating a little bit. They're kind of worried. 60 days late, that's another key date. They're really getting kind of worried now. They're calling you. If they can't find you, they're calling whoever you have down on your application as your nearest relative not living with you. Some people asked me in the past, why do you want to know the nearest relative not living with me on my loan application? Well, it's so that we can track you down if we have to, if you're ducking our calls, we can call the nearest relative. Now, it's kind of stupid because most people think, I don't know why they have it on there, if I call your mother and say, hey, have you seen so-and-so? Typically, they're not going to tell me the truth. I mean, they don't want to see their kid getting in trouble. So grandparents are even, worse or better depending on which side of the desk that you're on. Okay, grandparents won't ever give you up. Okay, sometimes parents want to teach you a lesson, and so they'll be like, yeah, I know where he is. But grandparents, they'll never give the grandkids up. You've got adversely classified loans. These are loans that have some major problems. So these are loans that are getting into the 90-day area, and that's the next key date, 90 days late. So substandard, doubtful, or loss, and these are kind of self-explanatory. Doubtful simply means we don't think we're going to get paid for that. A loss loan means that we've written it off the books. We have placed that balance against the allowance for loan and lease loss, and we hope there's some collateral that we can sell to get some of our money back. That's how it works. Some collateral sells better than other types of collateral. For example, cars. People tend to beat cars to death. If you repossess a car, it's almost always going to be in rough shape. It's just how it is. Very rarely do you find a car that's in really good shape that's been repossessed. Sometimes you do. Boats tend to be taken care of a little better than cars for some reason. Don't ask me why. They do. ATVs and motorcycles, don't ever buy a repossessed ATV or motorcycle. They've ridden it to death. They're going to take care of it. One of the best repossessions that I ever did as a banker was I repossessed one time. There was a guy who, it's a complicated story, but there was a guy who for years had two families. He had one family where I was working. He had another family in Memphis, Tennessee, about 3 hours apart. And for years, this guy had two families. He would spend weekends with one. He would then drive to the other. They knew nothing about each other. It sounds like something you'd read in some cheap novel or something, but it was the truth. Well, eventually, one day, one found out about the other. Divorce came, bankruptcy soon followed, and the guy was giving up his business. The guy's business was, he had one of these big, like sewer trucks, septic tank trucks. And his business was emptying septic tanks. Now, you may think that's a nasty business, and it is a nasty business, but it's a profitable business. So he was giving up his sewer truck and his Lincoln Continental. We were repossessing both of them. Both of them were, if you call a sewer truck nice, it was nice. It was clean. It was, had the nice stainless steel tank on it, big truck. That was probably the fastest and easiest sale I ever had for repossessed property. We didn't have it 2 days. It was sold to somebody for all of our money. We got all our money back for that. The Lincoln, which was also a nice car, we held it for 2 months probably and sold it for about half what we were owed on it. So that just goes to show you, if you ever have a chance to repossess a sewer truck, don't hesitate, okay? You can get your money back on the sewer. Or you can go in business for yourself, okay? So when you're going to make a loan, okay, and this is what, luckily I didn't make the loan to those guys, the loan, multiple loans to that guy. That was done before I got there. I just had to clean it up. But steps in the lending process, this is going to vary a little bit between banks, but primarily it's going to be the same no matter where you go. For example, first thing you got to do, you got to find loan customers. That sounds pretty easy. It's not so easy. If you're a consumer lender and you're making car loans or boat loans or motorcycle loans, they tend to come to you. If you're a commercial loan officer, which if you are in 537 next fall, we'll have 1 or 2 commercial loan officers at least come in and talk to you. You have to go to them. I mean, if you're a business owner, you're busy, you don't have time to go to the bank. And so those commercial loan officers, if you're a good credit, they will wine you and dine you and take you to play golf and whatever else to try to get your business. And a lot of times, it's not unusual to work on a customer for 2 or 3 years before they will even really talk to you very much. So you're grooming these customers because they're banking with somebody else. You have to convince them you're better than your competition. And that's not always an easy thing to do. But for good customers, it's worth it because, literally they can bring millions of dollars of loans with them when they change banks, if they change to your bank. So finding customers. Evaluating a customer's character and sincerity of purpose. Character is probably one of the most important things that a good loan customer has. If somebody's honest, if they have good character, they're going to try to, if they borrow money from you, they're going to try to pay you back no matter what happens. Sometimes life gets in the way and you've got medical problems or you've got medical bills or divorce or whatever, things that you can't control. But those good customers, they will find a way, if they can, to pay you back. So that's what we call character. The purpose of the loan, that's, when you're a banker, you loan money and you want to make money for your bank, but you kind of have to be careful, but you're sort of a financial consultant also, although you don't ever want to call yourself that. I'll explain why in just a minute. And so if somebody comes in and you turn them down for a loan, a lot of times that's the best thing you can do. And, when I first started lending money, I thought, man, these people, so-and-so is going to be mad at me if I don't, if I turn them down for a loan. And they are sometimes. But they may come back a few months later and say, hey, I'm really glad you turned me down for that loan. Because if I'd have borrowed that money to buy whatever it is, that new car, I didn't need that new car. And I took the money that I'd saved up to buy the new car, I started the business with it, and today I'm much better off financially because you did not make me that loan. Now, not all of them will be happy, and not all of them will come thank you, okay? But some of them will, because you're doing them a favor by not making them the loan. Making site visits and evaluating a customer's credit record. That's especially important if you're a commercial loan officer. You want to go to that person's business. You want to see it operate. You want to know, how do they make money? And if you can't follow it from point A to point B to point C to profit, you either need to have them explain it to you again, or you need to leave them alone and let somebody else loan the money, because you have to understand their business. So that's why commercial loan officers tend to make more money than any other type, is because not only do you have to understand the lending process from your bank's point of view, but you also have to understand how your customer's business runs. So it takes a lot of business smarts to be a commercial loan officer, because you're dealing with maybe farmers, you're dealing with manufacturers, you're dealing with home builders, you're dealing with all different types of business people. So you have to understand how they're making money. Evaluating customers' financial record. So that's going to be things like tax returns, for example, accessing possible loan collateral and signing the loan agreement, and then monitoring compliance with the loan agreement and other customer service needs. So this could be as simple as making sure that your customer has insurance on their car. Sounds pretty simple. But if your customer lets insurance lapse on their car and they total it, and that car is a collateral for your loan, as a lender, you get nothing. I mean, sure, you can take them to court, but most of the time, if they can't pay for their car, you're not going to get any money out of them. So, things like that seem pretty simple, but if you let some of these slip up, they can be really, really important. Okay, so credit analysis. What do you need to do if you want to analyze a loan to determine if you want to make a loan to a business or to an individual? Basically, there's 3 questions you have to answer. Number 1, is the borrower creditworthy, which we'll talk about something called the 6 C's of lending in just a minute. Number 2, can the loan agreement be properly structured and documented? And number 3, can the bank perfect its claim against the borrower's earnings and any assets that may be pledged as collateral? So let me go back to this for a minute in case any of you want to write that down. We're going to go forward a couple of slides to what's called the 6 C's of lending. So these are the things that you have to have knowledge of, hopefully, before you make a loan. Okay, if you don't have all of this, don't worry, I'll come back to this slide in just a minute for number 2. But let me jump ahead to the 6 C's of lending. Okay, so these are the things that you're going to look at as a lender. And you need to look at all of them. Okay, so the first one I mentioned earlier, character. Specific purpose of the loan and serious intent to repay the loan. As I said, this is probably of the 6, this is the most important. Some of the others don't have to be perfect, but if you know the character of a borrower and if they're a good character, that's probably the best thing that you can have in terms of somebody borrowing money from you. Capacity. A lot of people see this and they think, well, that means capacity. Well, that can the person afford to borrow the money? That is not what this means, okay? And I'm telling you this because you're probably going to see this on test number 3. Capacity means, are you legally able to enter into a legally binding contract? So basically, are you 18? That's one of the most important factors. Are you a legal adult? There have been a lot of bankers who have mistakenly loaned money to a 17-year-old. And if that 17-year-old doesn't want to pay you back, guess what? They don't have to pay you back. Because first of all, you couldn't legally loan them money. So there's no legal contract for them to abide by to pay you back. So that's one of the main things you want to check is you want to see some ID to make sure they are legally an adult and can enter into a legal contract.
Does that hurt the, well, I guess the 17-year-old would pass their test, so it pretty much does nothing for them, they're pretty cheap.
It wouldn't, and there's nothing that, it wouldn't even go in their credit after they turn 18 either. Because it's like nothing ever existed. Yeah. So it doesn't hurt their credit. You think, well, that never happened. It has happened before, okay? Cash. This is the ability to generate enough cash to repay the loan. Sounds pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You're going to borrow money. You need to be able to make the loan payment. Typically, you're going to look at the customer's cash flow or their salary versus their monthly payments that they have now. For most lenders, they don't want to get over around a 35% monthly debt to income ratio. It kind of goes from lender to lender, 33 to 38%, somewhere in there. So that way, they don't want their monthly payments going over that percent of your gross income. Because keep in mind, out of your gross income, you have to have taxes, you have to pay Social Security, you have to pay everything else, plus when you add on to that, you're talking about your house payment, your car payment, anything else, typically around, and some lenders will go up to 40%. But that's it. And you may think, that sounds kind of low. Make $1,000 per month gross, that means, you know, you could have up to $400 worth of payments, and some of you may think, well, I could probably have more than that in payments. Well, keep in mind, you know, there are things like eating that are kind of important and other expenses that you have. So by the time you take into account taxes, Social Security, food, everything else, that 40%, if you're 40% monthly debt to income, you're not doing much with your life, okay? You're going to work and you're making your monthly payments and that's it because you can't afford to do anything else. So kind of keep that in mind. Collateral. Is there adequate assets to support the loan? Pretty straightforward. If you're buying a car, that's going to be the collateral. Most banks, this has changed over the years somewhat, but most banks like to loan about 80% of the purchase price of a vehicle, although now it's not unusual to have 100% loans. 80% would make me more comfortable. If somebody's buying a $10,000 book value car and I loan them $8,000 and I have to repossess that car, I'm hoping I can sell it for about $8,000. Okay? That cushion, I mean, that's not an accident. That's what statistically they've shown they can probably sell the vehicle for, the asset for what it is. Conditions. These are economic conditions faced by the borrower. So, you know, is there anything adverse that they're facing? Are they employed at a corporation in town that has frequent layoffs or summer shutdowns, or are they rumored that they're going to go out of business, they're going to shut the plant down, whatever? Control. Does the loan meet written loan policy, and how would the loan be affected by changing laws and regulations? This would be something, let me think of an example of this, control. Okay, here's a good example. And again, I don't know the status of this. I don't know what's going to happen. Of course, there's lots of things have changed this weekend. I'm not saying I'm for or against it, okay? So nobody yell or throw stuff. A wall with Mexico. If you're a business on the United States side of the Mexican border and 80% of your sales are made to immigrants who come across the border on a daily basis, some legally, some illegally, and they're now going to put up supposedly a wall that would cut your business in half. A lender has to take that into account if they're going to loan you money, because you have no control over that. That wall goes up, you lose half your business. I mean, yeah, you can go in and tell the bank, I'm really sorry about that. I didn't really think the wall was ever going to be built. But your lender doesn't care. They just want to know when you're going to make your loan payment. So that's an example of something that a changing law or regulation, or in this case, a wall being built. If you're loaning money to businesses who operate in other countries, they may have political changes that you have no control over that could help or hurt your customer's business. So that's what that means. So for purposes of test 3, I want you to know all of these and what they mean. Okay, really important, the 6 C's of lending. All right, let me go back to number 2. Number 2 says, so we answered the first one, is the borrower creditworthy? Number 2, can the loan agreement be properly structured and documented? Now, I mentioned this earlier. Properly structuring a loan simply means what's best for your customer. What structure can you put on the loan that makes it most likely that your customer is going to pay you back? I gave an example of an ag loan earlier. Farmers tend to have most of their income in the fall. Sometimes all of their income in the fall. So October, November, December. If you're a bank and you loan money to a farmer and you are just dead set on monthly loan payments, that's not going to work out very well for your customer, because your farm customer may not have cash flow coming in every month of the year, so it will be much better to put them on a single pay note, which I discussed in chapter 18, so that interest can accrue during the year, but the loan payment and the interest is due in the month of November, because then they're more likely to be able to pay you. If you're loaning to a college student who works during the summers only, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but a single pay note where they can work in the summer, they can make enough money to pay the interest and part of the principal is going to work much better than a monthly pay car loan where they're not working during the year, so they can't make that monthly payment. So that's what we mean by structuring a loan. It's setting up the payment, when the payments occur, how much the payment should be, the length of the loan, etc. Another example of this would be if you loan, let's say you loan money to a customer to buy a lawnmower. They have a mowing business, and they estimate that mower is going to last 4 years. It's going to create cash flow for them for 4 years. You're not doing your customer a favor by financing that mower for 10 years, because it's only going to create cash flow. It's estimated for 4 years. So that's called the matching principle, which you're matching the life of the asset to the life of the loan. I've seen some people, they'll buy, and I'll talk in chapter 18 about home equity loans. And I've seen people get a mortgage on a house, a 30-year mortgage, and they may have some equity in the house, and so they're refinancing their home, and they say, oh, by the way, I think I want, let's say the house is worth $200,000. They only owe $120,000 on it. So they've got quite a bit of equity in the house. So they say, you know what? I've always wanted a bass boat. I think I'm going to buy a bass boat with the equity in my house. And so instead of borrowing $120,000 to pay off the old loan, I'm going to add $40,000 to it to buy my bass boat. I'm going to borrow $160,000 on a 30-year mortgage. Well, a 30-year mortgage against the house is one thing. A 30-year mortgage for a bass boat is something completely different. You do not want to finance a bass boat or a car or a motorcycle or an ATV or anything other than a piece of real estate for 30 years, and you really don't want to finance a real estate for 30 years if you don't have to. But I've seen it happen a lot of times. 30-year mortgage for a car. That just doesn't work out too well. Now, this is what I talked about earlier. If you're a loan officer, you need to be a financial counselor, but you don't want to get too involved in how the customer runs their business. And let me explain why. Let's say that you've got a customer, they've got a manufacturing business, and they're talking to you, and you say, you know what? I don't see why you're so small. I think you could triple your business. You could expand, I'd loan you the money, and you could expand 3-4 times what you're doing now, and you're going to make a lot more money. Your customer says, that's a great idea. Yeah, I'm going to do that. So they borrow a ton of money from your bank, they expand their business, and they go bankrupt. Guess who has a lawsuit filed against them? You, as a loan officer who suggested that your customer should triple their business, are now in court because the customer is going to say, I didn't really want to, but my loan officer said I should probably triple my business. And if you're in a court with a jury trial, how popular do you think bankers are in a jury trial against the poor business person who had to file bankruptcy because the big bad banker said they should expand their business? 95% of the time, the bank's going to lose. So this is what you want to be really careful, and you want to document what you're telling your customer. You want to stay away from kind of being a partner with them. Nothing wrong with giving them advice, but you want to stay away from being accused of this. Okay, lots of banks have been sued because their loan officers, or even if it didn't happen, the customer said, my loan officer told me to do whatever. All right. Also, can the bank perfect its claim against the collateral or earnings? So let me jump ahead to this. Okay, so collateral. As we said, collateral is simply what secures a loan. So if a loan goes bad, it's what the bank takes back. They try to sell it. The issue is the bank has to perfect its security interest in the collateral. So it depends on what type of collateral they're taking as to how they perfect that security interest. What that simply means is if you have to take it back, you want to legally be able to take it back. So some assets have titles. As I mentioned earlier, cars, trailers, boats, boat motors. If you buy a boat in certain states, you're going to have 3 separate titles. If it's on a trailer, you're going to have a title to the motor, you're going to have a title to the boat, and you're going to have a title to the trailer. If you finance a boat, a $40,000 bass boat, and you've got a title to the boat only, you're missing out on about $25,000 worth of that boat, which is the motor. And so when you go to repossess it and the motor's missing, and you tell the customer, you say, where's the motor? They'll be like, what motor are you talking about? You got a title to the boat. That's all I remember you loaning me money for. Okay? That's happened a lot of times. UCC, Uniform Commercial Code filings, this is for something that doesn't have a title. So I mentioned a tractor earlier, or if it's a business, you might have a UCC filing. I've done a lot of loans where you take as collateral inventory, furniture, and fixtures. So you put them on the UCC filing. That means if that customer doesn't pay you back, then at least legally, you can go in, you can take their inventory, their furniture, their fixtures, anything within the business, and try to sell it. Now, typically that stuff's not going to be worth much, but it is a motivating factor to the customer. And then if it's a piece of real property, a mortgage loan. Reasons for taking collateral, there's a couple of reasons. You need to know this for the test, okay? One, it serves as a contingent source of repayment. So it's a backup source of repayment in case the loan defaults. This is the worst reason for taking collateral, okay? You don't want to have to take the collateral back. So you don't ever want to make a loan to a customer where you can see in advance, I'm probably going to be taking this car back, okay? Don't let that be your decision for making a loan by simply thinking, you know, that's a pretty nice car. I could probably sell it and get most of our money back if the customer doesn't pay, okay? If you think that, you probably don't need to be making the loan in the first place. The second one's more important. It gives the lender a psychological advantage over the borrower. Simply knowing that somebody's going to come take your stuff if you don't make your monthly payment is a motivating factor for a lot of customers. I mean, your house may not be the best house in the world. Yeah, the sinks may leak and your heating bill's too much each month and your yard looks like crap. But you may, like sleeping with a roof over your head every night. So you tend to make that payment, or whatever it is, car, boat, whatever. So psychological advantage over the borrower. And then different types of collateral for business loans. Now this is basically for business loans. Accounts receivable. And somebody remind me, what are accounts receivable? I know you know this one. If you're a business and you have accounts receivable, assets, so what kind of assets? Okay, so you've sold stuff to somebody, whatever business you're in, you've sold stuff, and your customer owes you money. So one form of collateral could be you could take the accounts receivable of your customer. If they don't pay you, then that money, your accounts receivable, would then go to the bank. Factoring. This is when a bank purchases the borrower's accounts receivable for some percentage of book value, and the accounts receivable payments from the borrower's customers are then sent directly to the bank. Okay, so how this works is, say you've got a customer that business-wise, they're making pretty good money. But for some reason, they can't seem to make their monthly loan payment. The lender. And so you look at their financial statements, you look at their tax returns, you're thinking there's no reason that this customer should not be able to make their loan payment. What they're doing is they're spending their money before it gets to you. So what you can do is you can simply say, hey, let's do this. I'm going to buy your accounts receivable. I'm going to pay you, because I know some of them aren't going to be collected. Let's say 10% aren't going to be collected, and since it's saving you a little bit of work, I'll buy your accounts receivable for 75 cents on the dollar. That way, the customers who have bought things from your borrower on credit send their payment directly to the bank. You take out all the money needed for the loan payment, whatever's left goes into the customer's bank account. That way you make sure you get your money, and if you bought the accounts receivable, and, well, let me take that back. If you bought the accounts receivable, then anything left over actually is the property of the bank, okay? I told you wrong just then. It doesn't go back to the customer. So if I buy for 75 cents on the dollar and I actually collect 85 cents on the dollar, the difference is the bank's, because we're going to all the trouble to take care of all that. Okay, so this is a lot of trouble, but if you've got a customer that simply, when they get their money that's paid to them, they're not making their payments to the bank, sometimes this is the best solution. Inventory. If you take inventory as collateral, there's a couple of ways you can do it. One's called the floating lien approach, where the borrower controls the pledged inventory. That simply means, say, for example, if you're a car dealer and you're a bank, you've loaned the car dealer money to buy cars. Whenever they sell a car, they control the titles. They sell a car, they come in and then pay off part of their loan with the car sale, okay? A floor plan is when the bank would control the inventory and then they would release it as the goods are sold. So if you're a bank dealing with a car dealer and you have a floor plan approach, you're going to control the titles. When the dealer sells a car, they come to you and say, hey, I sold the 2015 Ford Explorer. You go through your list of titles and you find it, and when the dealer pays you for that sale, you give them the title, who then they will give it to the customer. it's a little more trouble, but it lets you, as this is your inventory and this is your collateral, it lets you keep a closer eye on what's happening with your collateral. You ever see the movie Fargo? The old movie Fargo? You got to reach back some for this. Okay? And the car dealer, there was a car that wound up missing. He gave 2 hitmen a car to kill his wife. And the car dealership's looking for the car. They're going, where's the car dealer? Where'd the car go? So a guy from the dealership's doing an inventory and they can't find the car, and you think, that never happens. You'd be surprised how often cars disappear from car lots. It's like they just disappear into thin air. Well, it's not. One of the employees is selling the car at a discounted amount to somebody. That person they're selling it to doesn't care if it has a title because they're going to take it to another state and tear it apart and sell the parts. But that happens a lot. And so when that happens, the bank is out collateral. So either one of these two work fairly well, depending on how much you trust your customer. Then you've got real property. This is real estate. So as collateral, we've talked about this previously in other chapters. You'd have an attorney do a title search, which makes sure the title to the property is clear. You'd have an appraiser do an appraisal to make sure that the property is worth what it's selling for. Sometimes you need a survey, sometimes you don't. You would then file a mortgage in the county where the property is located. And that is a public record, so everybody else knows you have loaned money against that piece of property. Personal property, it depends on what state you live in. For example, you may have something called a public financing statement or a title. In some states, well, it kind of depends. So for example, in the state of Kentucky, if you buy a car and you finance the car at a bank, do you keep the title or does the state keep the title? What? Okay. What's on the? How would I know that the car has a loan against it? Says it where? Okay. So on the title, it will say First Lien, First National Bank of so and so. So it says that. So if I try to sell that car and it doesn't show that title being paid off, okay, I mean, you can't buy the car. If you live in the state of Tennessee, then the bank keeps the title. So if you buy a car, they hold on to the title. When you're ready to sell that car and you have the payoff for the car, you go to the bank, you give them the payoff, they sign off on the title saying that it's been sold. So it depends on the state in which you live as to how this actually works. You've got a private pledge agreement. That's where the bank holds the property. This could be something like if let's say a borrower is using gold as collateral, a bar of gold. The bank may want to keep that bar of gold in the vault to keep it safe. I mean, that happens all the time. So if you use precious metals, gemstones, something like that, the bank may hold on to it. They may lock it in the safe, and until you, in the vault, until you pay the loan back, they're going to hold on to that piece of property. And then there's also personal guarantees. This is most common with businesses. So if you loan a business money, you may have a person sign as maybe the president of the business or the owner of the business, and then you may have that same person sign a personal loan guarantee. And what that says is, if my business can't make the payments for this loan, then I personally will pay the loan. And that's really common with small businesses or personal guarantees. And you may look at that and you may think it's spelled wrong. Actually, that's not spelled incorrectly. Okay? So when you look at this, go, damn, Lacewell can't spell anything. Okay? That's actually how it's spelled. All right. And then consumer information. Most of you know this already. If you're looking up information, you can pull a credit report. Um, all of you are smart enough to know this by now. If you don't want things to get out, you don't put them on the internet. I mean, you've been taught that since you were a kid. And you think, well, nobody's going to look on the internet. Nobody's going to look up my whatever account. Well, yes, they will, and they do. And you maybe don't want them to see some things that you're doing. So if you don't want somebody to see it, you don't need to put it on the internet. Information about businesses. Depends on how big the business is. If it's a publicly traded corporation, you can take a look at its credit rating. So for example, Moody's, Standard & Poor's. If it's a big business, you might see articles in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. You can go to risk management, RMA ratings. Again, the internet's a good source of business. Or financial statements supplied by the business. Tax returns, all different types of information. And governments borrow money sometimes. You have to be somewhat careful loaning money to a government agency. I mean, it's probably pretty safe, but some banks have been burned. Government agencies do go bankrupt occasionally. And then the different parts of a loan agreement. Again, I'm just going to rush through this. You can take a look at it later if you want to. A loan agreement is going to have a note. Tells how much the borrower must repay and on what terms. The loan commitment. This will be a pledge by the lender to make credit available in the future under specific terms. So not all loans have this. What kind of collateral is securing the loan, or is any collateral securing the loan? Loan covenants. You've got to know what, now for the test, I want you to know what an affirmative covenant is and what a negative loan covenant is. An affirmative covenant says what the borrower must do. So for example, in your loan paper, if you buy a car, it's going to say you must keep full coverage insurance on your car at all times. That's an affirmative covenant. If you buy a piece of property, it says you must pay the property taxes on this piece of property in a timely manner. Okay, that's what you must do. A negative covenant says what the borrower cannot do. So, for example, if you have certain assets as collateral for that loan, you can't sell those assets until you talk to the bank about it and say, okay, well, can I sell these assets? They're part of the collateral for the loan. And the bank's probably going to say, well, yeah, you need to bring some of the money that you're selling them for in to pay down your loan. Okay, so affirmative, what you have to do. Negative covenants, what you can't do. We talked about this earlier, guarantees and warranties. Event of default, this is going to say what's going to happen, and I can tell you what it's going to say. It's going to say that the borrower is responsible for all costs associated with the default of the loan. Attorney's fees, repossession fees. If the bank has to put insurance on your car temporarily when they repossess it, they're going to add that to your bill. You're responsible for all costs. Okay? So court costs, anything. That's what it's going to say. The borrower is responsible for all of that. And then the last part of the chapter, loan review. This is something that actually some of you at some point in your careers may get into something like this. Loan review is the part of the bank that makes sure that when loans are made by a lender, they're being made correctly, that all the rules are being followed. You're kind of like a bank examiner, except you work for the bank. And you can make pretty good money as a loan review person because you have to understand all of the rules and regulations associated with different loans. So every bank in this area has at least one loan review officer. Some of the bigger banks have a loan review department. They have several people doing this. So pretty important function, loan review. And The procedure, I mean, basically it's just, you're kind of taking a look at making sure your borrower is paying when they're supposed to, that the collateral is actually there and it's in good condition, all the documentation has been filed, that the borrower's financial condition hasn't worsened, and whether the loan officer followed all of the lender's policies. So that's kind of what you're looking for. And normally what happens is, you try to cover you can't review all loans, so you try to cover a certain percentage. And it makes sense that if you have to cover 40% of your loan portfolio as a loan review, you're going to choose the biggest loans because they make up a larger percentage of your loan portfolio than, a lot of really small loans. And let's see, finally, these are just, a lot of this is common sense, warning signs that you have a problem loan. So, things like delaying submitting financial statements to the bank. That could be a problem. It could just be somebody who's overlooked them. Changing accounting methods, restructuring debt, adverse changes in the price of a stock for a company, losses for 1 or more years, changes in the capital structure, deviations in actual sales from predictions, and unexpected or unexplained changes in, that's supposed to say, deposits. So all of those could be possible signs of a problem loan. Loan workout, again, this is another career that if you happen to get into banking, you might find yourself kind of working over to this area. Also, attorneys do this a lot. This is when you are the middle person between a borrower and a lender. Because sometimes there are millions of dollars at risk. And let's say, for example, you're a bank, you've loaned $50 million to a customer. The customer is having some business problems. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. Well, if you're a loan workout specialist, then you may get in the middle and you may negotiate a beneficial settlement for the lender and the borrower. Now, for doing this, you normally charge a percentage of the loan amount. Typically, it's around 10%. So for negotiating that loan and getting it worked out for the borrower and the lender, it was a $50 million loan. 10% of that is how much? $5 million. That's not a bad fee for getting a loan worked out. But to do this, as I said, typically attorneys are oftentimes involved in this. You have to know legally what's happening. You have to know business-wise what's happening. And you have to be really good with people. But you can make a fortune doing this if you are a good loan workout specialist. And you can take a look at these on your own, workout process. And finally, that is chapter 16. So are there any questions about chapter 16 before we take a really, really fast look at the study guide, just to make sure everybody understands what you're going to be preparing for? Questions about chapter 16? All right. Did I miss it? Here we go. Okay, now you'll notice there are some practice questions for test 3. So I would strongly suggest, just like with test 2, taking a look at the practice questions. You got the solutions here. This is your study guide. It's pretty straightforward. All right, so test number 3, only 3 chapters. Chapter 15, and again, go to Integrity. You're going to have chapter 15 is already there, chapter 18 is there, and then this chapter is going to be there also, chapter 16. Chapter 15, what are the tasks performed by bank capital? What are the types of bank capital? What makes up Tier 1 and Tier 2 capital? What is the Basel Agreement? That's not pronounced Basel, it's pronounced Basel. There's a Basel 1, Basel 2, and Basel 3s. And how to calculate Tier 1 capital ratio and the total capital ratio. So there's a formula there. Tier 1 capital ratio is Tier 1 capital divided by risk-weighted assets. The total capital ratio is Tier 1 plus Tier 2 divided by risk-weighted assets. And you're given all those numbers, so it's not really a difficult calculation to make. Chapter 16, what is the principal economic function of a bank? So that's going to be, should be in chapter 16. If it's not, let me know, but it should be right at the beginning of chapter 16. The types of loans, including the largest category, the most risky type of loan, the most costly to make. Now, some of this is going to sort of bleed over into here into chapter 18. Okay, so for example, the most costly type of loan to make is going to be a consumer loan, and that is per dollar of loan made, because you can make a $100,000 loan just as easy as you can make a $4,000 consumer loan. So most consumer loans are the most costly per dollar loan. The factors determining loan portfolio mix, loan restrictions to individual borrowers. And actually, I can go ahead and tell you this, okay? It says, what percentage of capital for nationally chartered banks? Nationally chartered banks can loan up to 15% of their capital to one borrower. Okay? 15% to one borrower. That's the maximum they can loan. And so that's why a lot of banks, if they're smaller banks and they have a customer come in who wants a big loan, they have to go into loan agreements with other banks because legally they can't loan as much as the customer wants to borrow. All right, the CAMELS rating. Know what the CAMELS rating is? We talked about that and its components. Know in general what should be in a bank's loan policy. That'll be in the chapter. The 6 C's of lending and how each helps determine credit worthiness, and examples of each. The types of collateral, the 2 reasons for taking collateral, parts of a typical loan agreement, what is an affirmative versus a negative covenant, what are the responsibilities of the loan review function, responsibilities of the loan workout specialist, and the types of banks, retail and wholesale, and their primary function. That is at the very first of the chapter, actually. And then chapter 18, what are the characteristics of consumer lending? When you listen to that, it'll explain that very well. Steps in evaluating consumer loan application in the lending process, credit scoring, how it works, what are its strengths, weaknesses, etc. Know the laws regarding consumer lending found in your book. What is predatory lending and what laws pass to reduce it? Which law covers loans to bank insiders? What is a scheduled loan, and what is the Uniform Financial Institutions Rating System, UFIRS? Again, study this information really well. You can score very well on this test, but you've got to spend some time. Be sure to listen to the integrity recordings. I think on the last test, I had one of the chapters on integrity, and I think a lot of people probably didn't listen to it, because that's where a lot of the questions were missed, was in that one recorded chapter. So I recorded it for your convenience, but please listen to it, okay? If you have questions between now and next Tuesday night, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next week. Credit cards. All right, everybody have a great week. Be safe. I'll see you back here next Tuesday.
About Twitter. So, I think the topic is mobile banking.
Let me stop this.